Hey Jackals, I'm Simon, and in today's DaVinci Resolve video, we'll make a cool particle effect that can look something like this, but it doesn't have to. You can make it look even cooler. As you can see, I've added the cube outline, just so you get an idea of how the cube is moving, but if you don't want it, you can simply skip it, and it can look something like this, as the image on the right. In this case, the effect is the same. I've just removed the actual outline of the cube. So if you like the effect and you want to know how it's done, follow along. Now let's get digital. So you'll want to open the media pool, right click, make a new fusion composition, make it. You don't have to change the duration because you can simply change it once the composition is on the timeline. Put it onto the timeline, also put the playhead over it, then go into the fusion page. Inside the fusion page, we'll first make a simple composition. We'll be using the 3D nodes. This is the shape 3D. And first we'll just make a cube. We need a render node so that we can see it in the 2D. Connect it. Now I'll display all of the rendering on the left side and the final output on the right side. So in the render node, we can see the cube, but we can't actually see it clearly. So I'll add the camera node, connect it, and now I'll select the merge 3D node, display it, select the camera, and I'll position the camera back. Now I think the distance of the camera is good. So what I can do is go to the shape 3D node because I think it's a little bit too big. Now I'll simply scale the cube down. And in the transform node, I'll change the rotation. Well, as you can see, currently this is just a plane. So in the shape 3D node, go to controls, and instead of the shape, we'll use a cube, which shouldn't make much difference, but I simply have to scale it down. Now, as you can see, it looks as before, but now if I go into the transform and change the rotation, this now actually looks like a cube. Now I'll just make a simple animation. I'm at the beginning. I'll keyframe it like this, and this is 5 seconds long, so I'll simply go to the end, make some slight adjustments, not too big. So let's see how fast this moves. I think this is moving slow enough. And in case you want to extend this animation, we'll simply go to the spline. I'll be selecting the X, Y, and Z rotation because this is my animation. I'll click zoom to fit, select all of the points, and I'll simply use set relative. And this will make the animation continuous. So once I extend the clip in the edit page, the animation will simply continue on without any hiccups. Now at this point, we don't see the cube, and that's fine if you don't want to use the edges, like I've shown in the first example. But if you don't want to see the edges, you can add some lights to this. So we can add some ambient light. And to see the changes, we'll have to go to the render node and enable the lighting. We also have point light, and we can also use the spotlight. So this is the point light. Use Alt and middle mouse button to change the view in this view. And now if I add a spotlight, this can give you another cool effect if you leave it at something like this. So this is a sharp edge. So if you want edges, just add the spotlight, and you can watch this video on what this will do. But now we actually want to add the particles to the shape 3D. So if you don't want to do anything with the edges, you simply don't need this. But it does help to position the cube in space. So now I'll add the particle emitter, and we need the particle renderer. Now in the particle emitter, we'll position this below the cube. So I'll position it down. In the region, this is a sphere, and let me simply display it and also connect it so that we see it in the same space. So you can use a sphere, or you can just use a rectangle if you want. And you would simply change the width and the height, and you would rotate the X value to 90. Just make sure that this covers the whole cube and maybe even a little bit beyond it. Now if we play this, the particles stay in the plane or any 3D object that you chose. So we'll simply go to the velocity and increase it. As you can see, the particles go to the right. So I'll change the angle to 90. So the particles now move up. Now we can make the particles as 100. But just so you know, the more particles that you have, the longer the composition, and the longer the lifespan, the more intense this will be on the PC. Now in the style, we can adjust the fade. So I've used 0.5. So the particles fade at the beginning. We can also do something at the top. So we can have it like this. Then I went to the color over life controls. I've added a bunch of points and simply changed the color of them. You can also adjust the variance if you want. So now we have the particles and we have the cube. But if I zoom in, it's not really visible, but the particles actually don't interact with the cube. So how we'll fix that is we'll use a bunch of other nodes. You'll find them in the effects, tools, and go to particles. Just have a look around. Now the one that we need is the P bounce. So the particles will actually bounce off of what we want. We want the particles to bounce off of the cube. So go to the region and change the region from line to mesh. And the mesh will be the cube object. Now you can limit the object by ID. In this case, you have to go to the Shape 3D node, Controls, and see what the object ID is. In this case, the object ID is 3. So in this case, if you want to limit the bounce to only this object, if you have multiple objects in the scene, you would enable this option and set this to 3. Now nothing happens, and that is because we now actually have to connect the shape to the P bounce. What happens? As you can see, the particles now bounce off. As you can see, the particles bounce off this way. Now what I did in the example is I've simply set the elasticity to 0. This should now make the particles stick to the surface. As you can see, that is exactly what happens. They hit against the surface and they continue moving on. The second particle node that I used was P.Force, and I've added it before the bounce. I've simply left it in the center, adjusted the strength a little bit. So as you'll see, the P.Force is in the center because when I select it, it will be inside the cube. So this is what I want. And we have to again limit this to the shape node. So into region, we'll select when not inside. And as for the region, we'll use the mesh and connect it to the P.Force. Now let's see what happens. So we have a bit more interaction going on, which may not be visible at first sight. So maybe increase the strength, maybe a bit too much, because the particles started to bounce off. And if the particles move too fast, you can simply lower the velocity. And maybe even add a little bit of variance. And because you don't see clearly what's happening here, I'll add the background at the end. And I have to position the background at the back. So with the merge selected, hit Ctrl T to switch these two inputs. And now you can see the particles. The third node that I've added was particle friction. This should make the particles really stick to the object. So again, inside region, we'll select the mesh, connect it. And as for the region mode, this should be selected as when intersecting the region. So when the particles hit the object, they will slow down. Now currently we have the cube and the particles displayed. So if you want just the particles, we'll add a 3D render node, and now we can display it. You can add a merge 3D node and the camera. Display this on the left, and then maybe position the camera to where you want it to be. So in this case, maybe the plane is not the best option. So let's see what happens if I go back and use a sphere. So let's choose a sphere. Let's see how this looks like. And I think this will give us a better result of what I actually had in the beginning. But now I may have to position and scale the sphere, so let's do that. So I have to scale it, as you can see, because it's not big enough. At the end, add a glow node to make the particle stand out just a little bit. In the style, you can also change from point to a blob, but in this case, you'll most likely have to change the size. So as control, scale this down. Now what you should do to make this a little bit easier on the PC is in the particle render, destroy the particles to leave the view. Now you can add all kinds of eye candy at the end, and what you can also add inside here is the p-flock. This one, p-flock. You can also add p-follow if you want, p-flock, or even p-vortex, maybe even some turbulence. When it comes to p-flock, I'll lower this value down to 10, because if it's too high, my PC just crashes. So again, into region, you would want to use the mesh, and then play around with the settings. I think I use this one, simply connect it, and let's go to this point and see what the difference is. It may not be noticeable, but it could be. So in this case, there is no difference, maybe because I don't have enough particles. So just these nodes, I'll set the particles to 200 so that we get a better look at the effect. Maybe it's a little bit too much with the blobs, so I'll change this back to points. So I think this looks okay. I'll just increase the duration later on. Now what I can add is the cube outline, and we'll do it with this cube. The simplest way to do it is to use edge detect. Then you have the edge. As you can see, this is the edge that I was talking about from the point light. But what I'll do instead of using edge detect is to simply display the wireframe, which you can do it like this. But I'll keep it as a software render so that I can actually see the particles. But I'll go to the shape 3D node, select the wireframe here, and I'll set the subdivisions all the way down. So this should make it so I only have one line. As you can see, I have one line now. If I increase the number of lines, so as you can see, you can have the effect like this. If you want this kind of a cube, I've simply used one. Now the line is not super visible. So what I did after this is I've added a bitmap, and you can also see this in the previous video. I've set this to luminance. Then we can add the background to add some color to this. By default, this is black. So we can add the color like so. Now, what I want to actually add is to have the same color as the particles. So I'll select the particles, go to the style, right click on the color overlay, and I'll click on publish. So I can now use this gradient. And in the background node, I'll select the gradient, right click here, and connect it to particles, color overlay value. So I have the same background value. If I just simply disconnect it, the background looks like this. It's not exactly what I want, because I want to animate this over the whole duration and not just have this static. So what I can do is go to the modifiers. So what I can do is use the offset to animate this, but I don't want this animation to end with one color, so I want it to ping pong. So it's continuous, and I'll animate this. So modify width, anim curves. Now open the modifiers tab, and in the anim curves, I'll simply use the duration of the whole clip. So now when I change the duration in the edit page, this will also change with it. So I can simply now connect it. And because my cube is not really visible, I can go to the bitmap and lower the high value of the luminance channel. And then I can also simply add a glow. So I'll copy this one, connect it. And if I display it now, and I can change the value to what I want. And at the end, we would simply combine these two values and make sure that this particle glow is on the top of this one. And now when I connect this, the cube will most likely be a lot bigger than the particles. So what you can do before you make the final merge of these two effects is to add the transfer node and simply scale this cube down so that it kind of fits inside the particles. Now in the end, you can scale this up if you need to, but I suggest you just use the camera nodes to position the composition how you actually need it to look like. And now in the edit page, as you can see, this is just a 5-second fusion composition, but you can simply extend it because we've made the animation to be extendable. And that's it. If you found the video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to get DaVinci Resolve and video editing content twice a week, and hit the bell notification icon so you know when my next video comes out. I'm Simon, and until next time jackals, keep it digital.